the invisible prison of false reality. What if the world you trust was never built to free you? What if the system you obey was designed to keep you asleep? What if the life you call normal is actually a prison so vast, most never realize they are inside it? Because beneath the noise of modern life, beneath the endless chase for survival, status, pleasure, and fear, there may exist an ancient design, a hidden architecture of control forged not by chance but by forces older than empire, older than scripture, older than recorded memory itself. Forces the Gnostics called the Archons, cosmic rulers born beyond the visible world, dark and powerful intelligences said to stand behind the veil of human suffering, manipulating thought, feeding ignorance, shaping deception, and binding souls to a cycle of fear, material obsession, and spiritual amnesia. And if you have ever felt that something about this world is deeply wrong, if you have ever questioned why humanity seems trapped in endless war, greed, lust, pride, corruption, and illusion, if you have ever sensed that beneath the surface of ordinary life there is something watching, influencing, distorting, then you are stepping into the same terrifying suspicion that haunted the ancient mystics. Because Gnosticism did not merely ask whether evil exists, it asked who built the cage, who benefits from your blindness, and what dark rulers may still govern the unseen machinery of this reality. In this journey, we descend into one of the most dangerous and forbidden spiritual revelations ever whispered through history: the hidden origins of the Archons, the rise of the Demiurge, the false creator Yaldabaoth who claimed divine authority, the mystery of Sabaoth, the seven ruling powers, and the sinister forces they embody through domination, violence, greed, arrogance, lust, and lies, not merely as myths of the past, but as living currents that may still shape governments, systems, beliefs, and even your own mind today. This is not just a story about ancient entities. This is a confrontation with the possibility that your exhaustion, your emptiness, your hunger for something beyond the material world may be the soul's memory that it was never meant to belong here. And by the end of this revelation, you may not simply see the world differently. You may finally possess the key to seeing through the invisible prison that has surrounded humanity from the very beginning. Gnostic origins and the architecture of cosmic control. The word Archon comes from ancient Greek, from Archon meaning ruler, lord, one who governs from above. And in the hidden language of Gnosticism, this was never a title of wisdom, never a name of sacred guardianship, but a warning, a symbol of cosmic authority twisted into domination. Because in the first centuries of the Common Era, as empires rose and orthodox powers fought to define truth itself, Gnosticism emerged not merely as a religion but as a dangerous spiritual rebellion. A radical philosophy whispered through mystery schools and forbidden texts, teaching that something was deeply wrong with the world humanity accepted as normal, that the suffering, decay, violence, and spiritual amnesia surrounding human life were not the masterpiece of a perfect and loving God, but the flawed construction of a lesser being, an ignorant architect known as the Demiurge, a false creator who, separated from the fullness of divine truth, fashioned the material universe not as paradise, but as architecture. A system of confinement disguised as life itself, where fear and endless craving define the lower realm, only the lower realm, a dense and distorted reflection beneath the pleroma, the divine fullness, the true spiritual source where the ultimate God resides beyond corruption, beyond division, beyond illusion. And between humanity and that divine fullness stood the Archons, servants of the Demiurge, cosmic jailers, wardens of the physical plane, gatekeepers of spiritual imprisonment whose purpose was not to destroy the soul outright but to keep it asleep, ignorant, fragmented, trapped in cycles of suffering, fear, false identity, and reincarnation like repetition, bound again and again to the material machine through deception. Because a soul that remembers its true origin can ascend, but a soul addicted to illusion remains controllable, And so the Archons became not merely mythological beings, but embodiments of systems, structures, and psychic forces designed to distort perception itself, manipulating thought, bending emotion, shaping civilizations, constructing societal systems, dogmatic religions, fear-based institutions, and internal mental prisons that convince human beings they are nothing more than bodies, consumers, workers, followers, or isolated egos, severed from their divine source. And if you have ever felt trapped in routines you did not choose, if you have ever sensed your fears were being fed, your desires engineered, your loneliness monetized, your need for validation exploited, then the Gnostic warning begins to feel less like ancient fantasy and more like psychological prophecy, because the Archons maintain power not only through force but through illusion, through making the false appear natural. What if the most terrifying prison was never built around you, but within you? What if the real bars were not iron walls or cosmic gates, but the beliefs you never questioned, the fears you inherited, the desires you were taught to chase before you were old enough to ask who placed them there? Because true domination does not always require chains. Sometimes it only requires conditioning so complete that the captive mistakes obedience for identity. The ancient Gnostics understood something chilling. The Archons did not merely govern through oppression. They governed by embedding themselves into perception itself, into shame, into insecurity, into the endless feeling that you are incomplete and must seek completion outside yourself. They whisper through comparison, through guilt, through fear of failure, through the desperate hunger to be accepted by systems that profit from your self-doubt. In this way, the prison becomes self-sustaining. Humanity polices itself. Souls forget they are sovereign because they are too busy proving their worth to illusions. And perhaps this is why awakening feels so violent. Because to break free is not merely to reject external deception. It is to confront the possibility that parts of your own identity were built by the prison. Through convincing humanity that the prison is freedom, and within ancient Gnostic cosmology, these rulers were often described as 7 primary archons, each aligned with planetary powers, each governing a vice, distortion, or psychological chain that binds human consciousness more tightly to the lower world. But before you can understand the rulers, you must understand the architecture of their kingdom. The Gnostic universe was not random chaos. It was hierarchy, layers, a spiritual descent from pure, divine fullness into fragmentation, density, and forgetfulness. The deeper consciousness fell from the pleroma, the more distorted reality became. And in that distortion emerged a terrifying principle: separation. Separation from source, separation from truth, separation from the self. This was the first fracture, because once consciousness believes itself cut off from the divine, fear becomes inevitable. And where fear rules, control becomes easy. The Demiurge and his Archons do not simply reign over matter. They reign over separation itself. Their empire is built on division, human against human, mind against soul, desire against peace. And perhaps one of the most effective weapons in this empire was never open violence, but wounded consciousness. Because a divided soul is easier to rule than a whole one. Trauma fractures perception. Pain distorts trust. Fear rewrites reality. A human being taught early enough that love is conditional, safety is fragile, or worth must be earned, may spend an entire lifetime seeking externally what was never truly lost internally. In this state, survival becomes the priority, not awakening, and systems built on fear thrive when humanity is too emotionally exhausted to question them. The fracture deepens when pain becomes identity, because those who are busy merely trying to survive rarely have the strength to ask who designed the conditions they are surviving, and every divided being becomes easier to govern than one who remembers its wholeness. The 7 Archons and the psychology of human enslavement. And above them all stood Yaldabaoth, the lion-headed serpent, the firstborn of chaos, the blind and arrogant demiurge himself, perhaps the most chilling figure in Gnostic lore, a being born from cosmic error, ignorant of the higher divine realms, yet so swollen with pride that he declared himself the only God, creator of the material cosmos, architect of the visible prison. And his greatest deception was not brute force but false totality, convincing humanity that the physical world is all that exists, that matter is ultimate, that spirit is fantasy, that survival is purpose, that consumption is fulfillment. This may be why modern consumer culture feels almost religious in its intensity. Endless acquisition, endless upgrading, endless hunger with no arrival. Not because possessions themselves are evil, but because the cycle never ends. Desire is constantly reignited. Satisfaction is constantly delayed. The system survives by keeping the individual chasing, never arriving. In this way, consumption becomes ritual, not sacred ritual that reconnects the soul, but synthetic ritual that keeps it distracted. People are taught to anesthetize spiritual emptiness with products, identity with brands, loneliness with spectacle. And the cruel brilliance of this design is that many never realize they are not feeding themselves. They are feeding the machine that profits from their disconnection. That death is the end. And in this deception, Yaldabaoth becomes more than a monster. He becomes every system that trains people to forget transcendence, every ideology that worships materialism, every voice that tells the soul to stop asking deeper questions. And from his dominion emerged Sabaoth, associated with Mars, the force of war, bloodshed, aggression, hatred, conquest, and endless conflict. Not merely the battlefield, but the inner architecture of rage itself. The power that turns tribes against tribes, nations against nations, neighbors against neighbors, and even within the individual, transforms pain into violence, fear into domination, insecurity into destruction. Sabaoth is every cycle of bloodshed repeated across history, every war sold as necessity, every hatred weaponized for control, every moment humanity is too consumed by conflict to awaken, and beside him stands Astaphios, or Astanos, linked to Jupiter, ruler of wealth, ambition, empire, greed, and corruption, the regal seduction of power, not through open violence, but through temptation, hierarchy, and the endless promise that status, riches, and earthly authority can finally satisfy the emptiness within. This is the Archon of kings, oligarchs, conquerors, corporations, and internal hunger, the force that convinces people to trade spiritual sovereignty for external success, to build empires while losing themselves, to measure worth through accumulation while their souls starve beneath luxury. And then comes Adonaios, associated with the sun, radiant and blinding, ruler of pride, vanity, ego, fame, and self-worship, perhaps more relevant now than ever in an age where identity itself is commodified, where image becomes religion, where recognition feels like salvation. Adonaios whispers one command: be seen or vanish, be admired or disappear, curate yourself, glorify yourself, inflate the false self until the authentic soul is buried beneath applause, likes, titles, and mirrors. And in his domain, humanity becomes addicted not to truth but to perception, not to meaning but to performance. And from pride we descend into Elios, aligned with Venus, ruler of lust, sensuality, pleasure, craving, and physical attachment, seductive and beautiful, yet devastating in his subtlety. Because Elios does not conquer through terror but through temptation, through the endless chase for satisfaction that never truly satisfies, through bodies mistaken for intimacy, through pleasure mistaken for peace, through desire that promises completion but leaves deeper emptiness. And here the prison becomes intensely personal, because how many people live not through conscious purpose, but through compulsive pursuit, scrolling, craving, consuming, distracting themselves from the silence where deeper truth waits. And then emerges Horaios, tied to Mercury, the shapeshifter, master of deceit, manipulation, false knowledge, distortion of truth, confusion, propaganda, and intellectual illusion. Perhaps the most psychologically dangerous of all, because Horaios rules not by force or appetite, but by corrupted information, by making lies sound rational, by flooding perception with noise, contradiction, distraction, and false certainty until truth itself feels unreachable. And in an era of algorithms, misinformation, curated narratives, ideological warfare, and manipulated perception, Horaios feels less like mythology and more like a terrifying mirror. Because any civilization that loses its grip on truth becomes effortless to govern. And though ancient systems often centered on 7 rulers, whispers persist of an 8th Archon, a hidden sovereign behind the veil, a deeper manipulator, an unseen orchestrator, influencing even the rulers themselves, a mystery left deliberately obscured, perhaps because the greatest control is the one never recognized. Modern Archons, technology, and the new Matrix. And while ancient Gnostics spoke through cosmic myth, modern interpretations have transformed these symbols into new frameworks, where Archons are no longer seen only as literal metaphysical beings, but as representations of hidden systems of domination operating through contemporary structures, governments, institutions, global elites, and invisible architectures of influence, leading some conspiracy theorists to suggest that political leaders, corporations, and powerful organizations may merely be puppets, serving larger unseen agendas. And among the most prominent voices in this landscape is David Icke, who proposed that interdimensional entities may manipulate humanity through elites, war, economic crises, fear, and chaos, feeding not unlike ancient archons upon lowered consciousness and division. And while such claims remain speculative, their symbolic resonance is powerful, because whether literal or metaphorical, they speak to a deep human suspicion that fear itself is often manufactured, weaponized, and distributed, not merely experienced. And this leads into another chilling modern parallel: the theory that reality itself may be manipulated, that human beings may inhabit a kind of matrix, a simulated perceptual prison, an engineered construct that obscures deeper truth, a concept popularized philosophically by Nick Bostrom's simulation theory, which asks whether advanced intelligence could create realities indistinguishable from authentic existence. And while Bostrom's work is secular and technological rather than Gnostic, the parallels are striking, because both frameworks ask the same terrifying question: what if perceived reality is not ultimate reality? What if the world as experienced is a controlled layer? And in an age dominated by artificial intelligence, immersive digital systems, algorithmic shaping, surveillance economies, and transhumanist dreams, ancient fears of archonic control take on startling new psychological relevance, because technology itself is not inherently evil, but blind dependence, emotional disconnection, dehumanization, and surrender of agency can transform tools into prisons. And so some modern theorists argue that unchecked digitalization, AI integration, and transhumanist ideologies may function as new gatekeeping systems, not through mystical entities but through technological overreach, gradually replacing spiritual awareness with synthetic identity, human intuition with algorithmic dependence, authentic presence with engineered distraction. Never have humans been more connected by machines, yet more abandoned by meaning, more isolated, more psychologically fragmented. This contradiction matters, because spiritual sovereignty weakens when people forget how to truly connect, not only with others, but with themselves. Constant distraction can create a population surrounded by noise yet starving for meaning. And isolation can make artificial systems feel more trustworthy than inner knowing. When loneliness becomes normalized, external programming grows louder than internal wisdom. The result is subtle but profound. A civilization that slowly forgets how to listen to the soul beneath the static. And again, these theories are largely speculative, lacking concrete evidence, but their metaphorical power remains undeniable, because they force humanity to confront a profound question: what controls us? What shapes our perception? What feeds our fears? What exploits our desires? What benefits when human beings forget their deeper nature? And perhaps this is where the true, enduring power of the Archon myth resides, not merely in supernatural horror, but in its role as a philosophical lens, a symbolic map of oppression, whether cosmic, political, psychological, or technological, reminding us that the greatest prison may not be walls, but unconsciousness, not chains but conditioned thought, not monsters, but the internalized systems that keep individuals disconnected from spiritual sovereignty. And so the ancient Gnostic call was never simply to fear the Archons, but to awaken beyond them, to reclaim Gnosis, divine knowledge, inner remembrance, the recognition that beneath fear, beneath greed, beneath pride, beneath lust, beneath deception, beneath every system designed to fragment the soul, there remains something untouched, something sovereign, something divine. And whether one sees Archons as literal cosmic jailers, archetypes of human vice, metaphors for oppressive systems, or reflections of modern psychological and technological control, the challenge remains the same now as it was 2,000 years ago. Can you see the illusion while living inside it? Can you recognize the forces shaping your perception before they define your destiny? Can you resist becoming a prisoner not only of external systems, but of your own unexamined fears and desires? Because the moment you begin to question the architecture of control, whether ancient or modern, mythic or institutional, you are already pressing against the bars of the inherited architecture of captivity. And perhaps that first act of awareness, that dangerous, liberating suspicion that there is more beyond the material script, has always been the beginning of freedom. Awakening, spiritual sovereignty, and the path to liberation. And so, after descending through the forbidden architecture of ancient Gnostic revelation, through the shadowed names of the Archons, through the false god, the cosmic prison, the seven rulers, and even the modern echoes hidden in systems, technology, power, and perception, one truth begins to rise above the fear. Archons are not merely distant mythical rulers of some forgotten astral kingdom. They are also living symbols of the deepest struggle every human being faces, the battle over consciousness itself. Because whether you see them as literal entities beyond the veil or as metaphors for invisible forces woven into psychology, society, and the modern machine, they point to the same haunting reality. Something is always shaping perception, influencing desire, distorting truth, and quietly asking you to mistake illusion for freedom. And this is why the story endures, because it is not only about ancient cosmology, it is about you, your fears, your cravings, your ambition, your loneliness, your hunger to belong, your need for validation, and the silent war over whether your life is truly your own. The Archons compel us to look deeper than surface narratives, deeper than inherited beliefs, deeper than systems that demand obedience without awareness, and to ask the question that changes everything. Are these forces external oppressors manipulating humanity from beyond? Or are they also the darker patterns within us? Pride, greed, fear, deception, ignorance, the inner chains that keep us spiritually asleep. And perhaps the most unsettling answer is that truth may live somewhere between both, in the meeting point between outer systems and inner weakness, where manipulation only thrives when unconsciousness leaves the door open. Because here is the greatest revelation of all. The greatest power of the Archons was not domination. It was invisibility, to question the script, to notice the invisible bars, and once illusion is seen clearly, its power begins to fracture. Because the moment you recognize the chains of ignorance, fear, and false identity, you are no longer merely a prisoner. You become a witness. And from that awareness comes the first spark of liberation, the reclamation of spiritual sovereignty, the remembrance that beneath every system of control, every distortion, every fear-based structure, there remains within you the capacity to awaken, to choose, to reclaim your mind, your soul, and your deeper connection to truth. So do not accept reality blindly. Question what is presented to you. Seek deeper truth beyond surface appearances. Protect your consciousness as fiercely as you protect your body. Begin quietly. Observe your habits, your fears, your cravings, and ask which ones are truly yours. Step back from constant distraction. Create silence long enough to hear your own mind beneath the noise. Question every system that demands your unconscious obedience. Protect your attention like something sacred. Seek truth, not comfort. Reclaim the parts of yourself shaped by fear. Because awakening does not begin when the world changes. It begins when you do. If this awakening has opened a crack in the illusion, do not let it close. If this revelation opened your eyes, do not return to sleep. Continue uncovering the hidden knowledge, ancient truths, and spiritual insights that break false narratives. And continue uncovering the hidden knowledge, ancient truths, and spiritual insights that help break false narratives. Share this with those ready to question, because every awakened mind strengthens the path, and together, remembrance becomes resistance.